not because they sinned. A modern retelling inspired by the man born blind in John, chapter 9, written by Susanna Sunday. There are questions that wound before they seek answers. Who sinned? That was the question people asked when they saw the man who had been blind from birth. They did not ask his name first. They did not ask whether he was loved. They did not ask how many nights his mother had stayed awake listening to him breathe. They did not ask what his father had sacrificed. They saw his condition before they saw his humanity. And so they asked Jesus, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. John chapter 9, verse 3. This is the story of three families who lived under questions people were too careless to ask gently. One family had a daughter living with autism and severe sensory processing difficulties. One family had a son who was blind and fed through a tube. One family had a child who used a wheelchair and lived with seizures. And all three families were learning that mercy does not always arrive as one dramatic moment. Sometimes mercy comes as sleep. Sometimes mercy comes as food, tolerated. Sometimes mercy comes as a calm body. Sometimes mercy comes as a sibling laughing again. Sometimes mercy comes as the strength to go to work after crying in the bathroom. Sometimes mercy comes as the voice of Jesus saying over the whole house, This is not punishment. This child is not a mistake. I am here. Chapter 1, the question nobody asked properly. Maya was 9. She was autistic, bright, beautiful, sensitive, and easily overwhelmed by the world. The world was too loud for her. The blender in the kitchen was an enemy. The school bell felt like lightning. The seams in her socks could ruin the morning. The smell of certain foods could send her running to the corner of the room, hands over ears, rocking until her body found safety again. Her mother, Ruth, had become many things. Mother, advocate, speech therapist, occupational therapist, nutrition researcher, school negotiator, appointment keeper, meltdown interpreter, night watchwoman, but she had stopped being one thing, herself. At work, Ruth was professional. She answered emails, she joined meetings, she smiled when people asked, How are you? She had learned that most people did not really want the true answer. The true answer was, I am tired in my bones. My child screamed for 40 minutes because her safe cup was missing. I have not slept properly in weeks. My marriage is quiet because both of us are exhausted. My other child thinks I love her less because Maya needs me more. But instead, Ruth would say, I'm fine, thank you. And then she would go into the disabled toilet at work, lock the door, and breathe. If this story speaks to you, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share mercy daily with someone who needs it. Chapter 2, The Boy Who Saw Without Eyes. Across town lived Samuel. He was 7 years old, blind from birth, and fed through a tube. His mother, Grace, knew the sound of every machine in his room. She knew which alarm meant danger and which alarm meant the tube had shifted slightly. She knew how to clean, flush, measure, record, sterilize, lift, comfort, pray, and carry on. Doctors spoke in long words. Specialists spoke in probabilities. Forms asked brutal questions. Can the child feed independently? No. Can the child walk unaided? No. Does the child require overnight care? Yes. Grace had written yes so many times that the word felt like a bruise. Samuel's father, Kojo, worked in logistics. He left before sunrise and came home after dark. Every day he carried two worlds, the warehouse where targets mattered and the home where survival mattered. He loved his son deeply, but sometimes he stood in Samuel's doorway and felt ashamed of his own grief. Samuel could not see his father's face, but he knew his voice. Daddy? Yes, my son. Are you there? I am here. That became their nightly liturgy. Are you there? I am here. And though Kojo did not always feel strong, he began to understand that presence itself was mercy. Chapter 3, The Child in the Chair. Then there was Hannah. Hannah was 11. She used a wheelchair and lived with a neurological condition that brought seizures without warning. Some days she was alert, funny, sharp, and full of questions. Other days her body betrayed her before breakfast. Her mother, Abina, had become fluent in observation. She could tell by Hannah's eyes when something was wrong. She could hear a seizure before it fully arrived. She could sense danger in a pause. Her husband, Michael, worked as a teacher. He taught other people's children all day, then came home to a child whose future he could not plan with certainty. Their son, Caleb, was 14. He loved his sister fiercely, but resented the hospital bag that was always packed by the door. He hated himself for resenting it. One evening, after Hannah had been taken to hospital again, Caleb sat alone at the kitchen table. Abina found him there. He said, "Mom, is God angry with us?" The question entered her chest like a knife. "No," she said immediately. "But why is Hannah like this?" Abina sat down beside him. For a moment, she had no words. Then she said, "I do not know all the reasons, but I know this. Hannah is not God's punishment. She is our daughter. She is your sister, and God loves her." Caleb looked down. "Then why doesn't he heal her?" Abina closed her eyes. "I am still asking him that too." Chapter 4. The Old Question in a New World. The three mothers met in the waiting area of a children's therapy center. Ruth had Maya's sensory bag. Grace had Samuel's feeding supplies. Abena had Hannah's emergency medication. They recognized one another without introduction. There's a tiredness only certain parents know. A tiredness that sits behind the eyes. A tiredness mixed with fierce love. A tiredness that says, "I will keep going, but I do not know how." Ruth was the first to say it. "Do you ever feel judged?" Grace gave a small laugh. "By people or by form?" "All of it," Ruth said. Abina nodded. "People still ask questions as if disability must have a culprit." Grace looked at Samuel, who was sitting beside her, turning his head toward the sound of Maya humming softly. "In church, someone once asked me whether there was something in our bloodline that caused Samuel's blindness." Ruth's face tightened. Abina whispered. Grace looked down at her hands. "I know people mean well sometimes, but some questions carry accusation." Ruth said quietly, "Like John 9. The others looked at her. Ruth continued. "The disciples saw the man born blind and asked Jesus who sinned, him or his parents." Abina's eyes filled. "And Jesus said, 'Neither.'" Grace nodded slowly. "Neither." The words sat among them like water in a dry place. "Neither. Not the child, not the mother, not the father, not punishment, not shame, not divine rejection. Neither." Chapter 5. Mothers who became clinicians. By necessity, the mothers had become experts. Ruth could explain proprioception, vestibular input, auditory overload, visual schedules, food aversions, and transition anxiety. Grace could explain tube feeding, aspiration risks, developmental milestones, vision impairment support, and medical supply routines. Abina could explain seizure protocols, wheelchair access, medication timing, muscle tone, fatigue, and emergency care plans. They knew more than they ever wanted to know. They had become clinicians for their children, therapists for their households, interpreters for schools, defenders in meetings, researchers at midnight, but nobody had become a therapist for them. Nobody asked Ruth whether she still recognized herself. Nobody asked Grace what it felt like to clean medical equipment while other mothers packed lunchboxes. Nobody asked Abena how many versions of the future she had buried quietly. The mothers carried pain with competence. That made people assume they were coping, but competence is not the same as rest. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share Mercy daily. Your subscription helps more families find this content. Chapter 6. The day everything broke quietly. One morning, all three homes woke into crisis. Maya refused every item of clothing Ruth offered. The socks were wrong, the light was wrong, the cereal smelled wrong. The school taxi arrived, and Maya screamed until her throat was raw. Ruth called work. Again, her manager paused before speaking. "Ruth, we need to discuss the impact of these absences." Ruth looked at Maya, curled under the dining table. "Yes," she said. "I understand." But inside she thought, "No, you do not." Across town, Samuel's feeding tube blocked. Grace had to cancel an important work presentation. Tojo was already at work and could not leave immediately. Grace handled the blockage, called the nurse, soothed Samuel, and then opened her laptop with trembling hands. Her colleague messaged, "Are you joining the meeting?" Grace typed, "Family emergency. I will join shortly." Then she deleted it. Then she typed again, I am sorry, I cannot attend. In another house, Hannah had a seizure just as Michael was preparing to leave for school. Caleb missed the bus. Abena called the hospital. Michael called work. Caleb sat on the stairs, school bag beside him, face blank. He said, I hate this. Then immediately, I don't hate Hannah. Abena pulled him into her arms. I know. That morning, nobody felt victorious. Nobody felt inspirational. Nobody felt like a testimony. They felt human and tired and afraid. Chapter 7, The Mercy of Small Things. But the next morning was different. Not perfect, just different. Maya slept until 6:40 in the morning. That was rare. She came downstairs quietly, accepted her blue cup, and ate toast cut into triangles. Ruth stood at the counter watching her. Toast, triangles, calm. She began to cry. Her husband, David, came in and asked, What's wrong? Ruth shook her head. Nothing. That's the point. Nothing is wrong this morning. They stood together in the kitchen, afraid to speak too loudly in case peace fled. Ruth whispered, This is mercy. In Samuel's house, the feeding went smoothly. No alarms, no blockage, no coughing, no distress. Samuel smiled when Kojo kissed his forehead before work. Daddy? Yes, my son. Are you there? Kojo bent low. I am here. Samuel reached out and touched his father's face. Kojo closed his eyes. That was mercy. In Hannah's house, there were no seizures that morning. Caleb made tea for his mother. Hannah laughed at something silly, he said. Michael watched them from the doorway. For 10 minutes, they were not a medical household. They were just a family. That too was mercy. Chapter 8, The Works of God. Later that week, the three mothers met again. Grace brought up John 9. She read it aloud from her Bible. And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him. John chapter 9, verses 1-3. Ruth said, I used to think the works of God meant only the final miracle. Abena looked at her. And now? Ruth watched Maya through the therapy room glass. Now I wonder whether the works of God are also seen in the love that keeps showing up. Grace nodded. In the strength to clean the tube again, Abena added. In the grace to apologize to the sibling who feels forgotten, Ruth said. In the teacher who finally understands, Grace said. In a father who stops running from grief, Abena said. In a child's body resting for one day. They sat quietly. The miracle had not arrived in the way. They were still praying but the works of God were not absent. They were being revealed in endurance, tenderness, advocacy, protection, wisdom, patience, provision, and daily mercies. Chapter 9. The question rewritten. That night, Ruth thought about the question. Who sinned? She realized how cruel it sounded when placed over a child. Who sinned that Maya cannot tolerate sound? Who sinned that Samuel cannot see? Who sinned that Hannah uses a wheelchair? Who sinned that a mother becomes a nurse before breakfast? Who sinned that siblings learn hospital vocabulary too young? Who sinned that fathers cry in parked cars? Jesus did not permit the question to stand. He rewrote it, not, who is to blame, but where will God reveal his works? That changed everything. It did not remove the pain, but it removed the shame. And sometimes shame is the heaviest part of suffering. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and share mercy daily. Every share reaches a family that needs to hear this. Chapter 10, The Fathers. The fathers had their own quiet grief. David, Maya's father, missed the version of family outings he had imagined before diagnosis. Then he felt guilty for missing them. Kojo feared dying before Samuel could live without him. Michael worried about Hannah's future, Caleb's resentment, Abena's exhaustion, and his own inability to fix anything. One evening, the three men met after a support group session. At first, they spoke about practical things, benefits, schools, medical letters, work flexibility. Then Kojo said, Sometimes I do not know how to be a father to suffering. The honesty opened the room. David said, Sometimes I sit in the car before coming inside. Michael nodded. I do that too. Kojo looked relieved. I thought I was the only one. Michael said, No. Sometimes the house is full of love, but also full of need. And need can be frightening, David whispered. I keep asking God to heal Maya, but lately I have been asking him to heal me too. I do not want my fear to become her atmosphere." The men were silent. Then Michael said, "Maybe that is also the work of God." Chapter 11. The siblings. The siblings carried invisible assignments. Maya's brother, Daniel, knew not to touch her lined-up toys. Samuel's sister, Adjoa, knew how to describe colors to him. Hannah's brother, Caleb, knew where the hospital bag was kept. They loved deeply. But they also lost things. Attention, spontaneity, quiet, normal childhood moments. One afternoon, the parents organized a siblings picnic. Nothing ambitious, just a quiet garden, snacks, safe, and no speeches. Caleb finally said what the others felt. "Sometimes I feel bad for wanting a normal day." Adjoa answered, "I do too." Daniel looked at the grass. "Sometimes I want people to ask how I am, not just how Maya is." Ruth overheard him. Her heart broke. That evening, she sat beside Daniel. "I am sorry," she said. He looked surprised. "For what?" "For the times your pain was quieter, so I did not hear it." Daniel looked down. "I know Maya needs you." Ruth touched his hand. "You need me too." That night, Ruth wrote in her mercy journal, "Today, God showed me Daniel." It was not the miracle she had expected, but it was healing. Chapter 12. The light that came slowly. In John 9, Jesus healed the man's blindness with mud and instruction. He said, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam." The man went, he washed, he came seeing, but in the modern homes of Maya, Samuel, and Hannah, the light came slowly. It came through routines, through therapy, through medication, through access ramps, through sensory tools, through tube feeding supplies, through school meetings, through financial provision, through friends who stopped giving advice and started bringing meals, through employers who began to understand, through churches that made room for noise, movement, silence, disability, and difference, through parents who stopped asking, "What did we do wrong?" and began asking, "Lord, how will your works be revealed here?" Chapter 13. A different kind of testimony. Months later, the three families gathered for a small Thanksgiving evening, not because everything had changed, but because they had changed. Maya still needed support, Samuel still needed tube feeding, Hannah still used her wheelchair and still lived with medical risk. But the families had begun to recognize God in the ordinary. Ruth stood and said, "We are still praying for healing. I will never stop praying. But I also want to testify that this week Maya slept through the night twice. She ate well, she laughed with her brother, and I saw the mercy of God." Grace said, "Samuel's feeding went well for 5 days. No hospital visit, no emergency call. And one morning he touched his father's face and smiled." "That was mercy," Abina said. Hannah had a calm week. Caleb spoke honestly. We apologized. We ate together. We breathed. That was mercy. Nobody shouted. Nobody exaggerated. Nobody pretended, but the room was holy because gratitude had become worship. Chapter 14. The voice of Jesus. Over the families. That night, Ruth dreamed. She saw Jesus walking through a hospital corridor. He did not hurry. He entered therapy rooms, waiting rooms, bedrooms, kitchens, school offices, and parked cars. He touched wheelchairs. He stood beside feeding pumps. He sat on the floor next to overwhelmed children. He placed his hand on the shoulders of mothers who had forgotten they were daughters, too. He stood beside fathers who felt they were failing because they could not fix the pain. He bent low to siblings who had become quiet, and over every child he spoke. Neither this child nor the parents sinned. Then he said, "Let the works of God be made manifest here." When Ruth woke, the house was quiet. Maya was still sleeping. The sun had not fully risen. Ruth went to the kitchen and opened her mercy journal. She wrote, "Mercy woke the house again." Chapter 15. The ending that is really a beginning. This is not a story that ends with every wheelchair folded away, every tube removed, every diagnosis reversed, every sensory difficulty gone, every seizure stopped, every blind eye opened, and every family suddenly free from struggle. That may come. God is able. Jesus still heals. Jesus still restores. Jesus still opens eyes. Jesus still raises the impossible. But this story ends where many families live: in the middle, in the waiting, in the ordinary morning. A child sleeping well, a mother drinking tea while it is still warm, a father going to work with courage, a sibling being noticed, a feeding completed without distress, a wheelchair moving through an accessible doorway, a sensory storm passing, a family praying again, a house breathing again, and above it all, the words of Jesus: "Neither hath this man sinned nor his parents, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." So, to every family living with autism, blindness, disability, chronic illness, tube feeding, seizures, medical uncertainty, sensory overload, developmental delay, or long waiting, your child is not a punishment, your family is not forgotten, your exhaustion is seen, your labor is holy, your tears are counted, your ordinary mornings matter. And while you wait for the fullness of healing, do not miss the mercy already in the room. If you slept, that was mercy. If your child ate, that was mercy. If the night passed, that was mercy. If your mind held together, that was mercy. If your body stood again, that was mercy. If love remained, that was mercy. And if mercy has met you today, then God has not abandoned your house. He's already there. Closing reflection. This story is for every parent who has ever wondered whether they did something wrong. For every mother who became a nurse, therapist, advocate, researcher, and carer, while forgetting how to be cared for herself. For every father who goes to work with a breaking heart. For every sibling who loves deeply but also feels unseen. For every child whose body, brain, senses, or development does not fit the world's narrow definition of normal. Jesus does not look at your family with accusation. He looks with compassion. He does not begin with blame. He begins with sight. He sees the child. He sees the mother. He sees the father. He sees the sibling. He sees the house. And he says, this is not the end of the story. Healing belongs to God. Timing belongs to God. But mercy is already here. His compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Lamentations, chapter 3, verses 22 and 23. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and share mercy daily with every family who needs to hear this. Visit us every day at www.mothersfaith.xyz. This film was created by Susanna Sunday. A Mother's Journey of Faith, Autism, and Self-Discovery. Copyright 2026, Susanna Sunday. All rights reserved.